Hey everybody, in this episode of iTalk Movies, we're going to get up close and personal with filmmaker Alla Kovgan. Let's do this.
Welcome to Popcorn Talk, featuring movie discussion, news, and interviews. Popcorn Talk. We talk movies. And now, here's Popcorn Talk's iTalk Movies.
Hey everybody, welcome to iTalk Movies. This is the show where we get up close with the people both in front and behind the camera that bring you all that great entertainment that you get to see in theaters, at home, or on a mobile streaming device. I'm your host, Frank Moran, and my guest today is a filmmaker born in Moscow, whose works include the film Nora and the Emmy-nominated Traces of the Trade. Her latest film is a 3D cinematic experience about legendary American dancer and choreographer Merce Cunningham, called, appropriately enough, Cunningham. The film opens in theaters December 13th. Please welcome Alla Kovgan. Alla.
Hello.
Look at this. Fresh off a flight from Washington, D.C.
Absolutely. We just had a screening there at Smithsonian American Art Museum just yesterday.
Oh, well, fill us in on the deets. How was the screening?
It went really well, especially given that I also got to stroll around the museum and see some great works.
Very nice. While you're there, did you have a work when you knew you were going to be screening there? You said, while I'm there, I've got to go see this.
Actually, it happened on site because I started realizing that all the museums are free. You just can walk in and you can just don't have to go through security checks like in New York and everything. So it was just very organic, I would say.
Very nice. How much time did you get a chance to stroll around the museum?
Like good hour. So that was feeling good.
Do you, because you know, like, hey, I'm only here for a limited amount of time, I've got to walk fast to cover as much land as possible? Or do you like, I'll just, for as much time as I can get in a space as I can cover in an hour, that's good enough?
Actually, I went to see one of my favorite artists. His name is Joseph Cornell. He most of his career is 50s and 60s, so he's considered American modernist. But I think Salvador Dali called him the American surrealist. And he made boxes. Whenever he liked, somebody like an artist or a ballerina, or, he would make those kind of amazing objects and he would collage elements, things into it.
Interesting. So so it's just a 3D box with images inside.
Exactly, 3D box. Yes.
No, look at that.
We'll get to that.
Yes,
actually.
yes.
There is a reference. Yes, you got it.
Well, to talk about you though and your beginnings, born in Moscow.
Yes.
I grew up there as well.
Yes, I basically entered graduate school in Moscow, so I left in the second part of the 90s, 96. And my first background is in linguistics, so I speak quite a few languages. But then I really got, fascinated by cinema, and I felt that's probably the language I would like to stick with.
Now, for your work that you've done, this one you decided to choose Cunningham, based on the world-renowned dancer. Was film or dancing a first interest of yours as you grew up?
Well, it's interesting. A lot of people, after especially this movie, they ask me whether I've ever danced. No, I've never danced. I played ping pong in the USSR, which was as a young professional. So that's as far as my choreography skills went.
That is pretty awesome.
It was quite like a boot camp all the time, So it was, I don't know. You don't know how to grow up in the USSR, so things are. They just tell you this is what you do, and I did. They
decided you will be a ping pong player.
Exactly, because my legs were not good for ballet. You check out the legs, see how things are. I didn't have absolute pitch. I couldn't do the piano. So you basically weed out everything, things that you don't qualify for. Ping pong was good.
Well, I know for me, when I said hey, I'm going to join band, anybody that was interested, they'd bring you down to a room with all the instruments and have you just go down the line and try until you got one that you kind of sounded okay on, and then they go, all right, that's going to be your instrument.
Absolutely.
Very much the same for you. They just make you try different things. And
and then if you're not good at anything, you go to do ping pong.
Now, for you, is ping pong all right, great, ping pong's cool, or you're I got to do ping pong?
I loved it. I think it's a very mathematical game, which is interesting, and I think and it's incredible amount. People think, what's just so hard about it? Actually, it's all about your legs. They say that you run more than a marathon runner during one game.
Really?
So it's actually quite interesting. It's all about coordination, and it's like you're like a chess player also, because it's all about strategy. So when I got to the U.S., I didn't play ping pong, but I felt that I can't quite write scripts. You know, I really came to do cinema with like a suitcase, like a traditional immigrant story. But, you know, I was very fluent in English, but it took me 10 years to be able to write in English properly.
Okay.
Because I think, you know, it's a level of fluency that you have to reach. It doesn't come if you live in a different country. And so what I started doing, I turned to working with physical performers. I was thinking, well, maybe if people don't talk, you know, I would have more chances to make movies with them. And that's how I discovered and got interested in modern dance. And what's interesting is that modern dance and cinema share a birthday. It's the late 19th century. And of course, cinema was invented to capture motion, if you think of it.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, the most interesting movers were the dancers. So Thomas Edison ended up filming a lot of dances. And all the first movie stars were either physical comedians or vaudevillians or, you know, acrobats or you name it. They were dancers. And they're the ones who made cinema popular. So, you know, I really enjoyed that world of this kind of physical performance, silent cinema, and then dance film collaboration. So I got into this, you know, coming from Russia and kind of having this kind of encyclopedic approach to things. I had to know everything. You know, what happened. You know,
put yourself into your own little boot camp.
Exactly, yeah. So what happened in dance film? I mean, how the musicals came about? What happened? So I kind of went and dived into that world. And I started a festival in St. Petersburg, actually, trying to bring all kinds of dance films and show to my compatriots at the time, you know, to just sort of share what I've been discovering. And then I started realizing, my God, like, you know, the films that people remember the most are musicals. Think about West Side Story or Sing in the Rain or Cabaret or All That Jazz. Mm-hmm. You know, these films stay. And why? Because actually performing arts and cinema arts have a lot in common. If you think of it, as directors, we always choreograph. Even if people don't dance, we tell them where to enter and where to exit. We sort of organize action in time and space, and that's what choreographers do. So that was just an interesting kind of journey, and so that's how I've been, you know, migrating this world. I mean, my métier, kind of my craft, became editing, and editing is also a sort of an act of choreography in many ways.
Very true. I mean, because you're like the last chance to shape the story.
Yeah.
I mean, that's like, as I say, it's 3 times in the script, in the field, and then in post. You can
Absolutely.
shape that story. Now, for you, because I from what I was reading, that what you thought about film is that that's something that you could cross cultures.
Yes.
That was a great thing about it, a great medium to be able to communicate with others. What was the first film that kind of resonated with you to see, like, oh yeah, this is the power of film?
It's interesting. I mean, when I was in Russia, actually, we had this amazing place called Museum of Cinema. And they, again, this encyclopedic approach, if you show Kurosawa, you show all Kurosawa. Wim Wenders, all Wim Wenders, Herzog, all Herzog, like this kind of massive retrospectives. And we went and we saw all these, you know, films. But there was this one Soviet person that, he's actually of Armenian descent, this filmmaker, Sergei Parajanov. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but he's kind of belongs to this art cinema world. And although he made films during the USSR, now they're like the gems, like Tarkovsky and all this. I mean, you know, they're just like this incredible gems. And, you know, he made the film about a poet, Armenian poet. And you'd think, you know, what do I have to do with it? Or how do you communicate, you know, this story? And what he did is he created metaphors about every little thing. Like, for instance, you know, the script probably said the poet liked reading when he was a child, but he would stage this massive scene with like 1,000 books on the rooftop of the 3 churches and a little boy lying among them. You know, so he made those incredible images, you know, and it doesn't matter whether you understand it or you don't, but you're definitely drawn to it. There was this kind of mythology that he created, and I was very, very inspired by that. And of course, it's interesting because I got to make a film, Nora, that we shot in Mozambique on the border with Zimbabwe. She's a Zimbabwean, Zimbabwe-born choreographer who lives in New York and works in New York right now. But it reminded me, that Parajanov film constantly was in my head when we went there. And Nora would say, well, what does it have to do with Zimbabwe? And I was like, well, it doesn't, but it also has this kind of way of thinking about things, you know, as sort of images, because I think cinema is really best at action, at making action, at working with action and making images.
Now, you mentioned editing, because that was your first entry into filmmaking. What was it about editing that really just said, like, yeah, more than writing, directing, or any other aspect of production behind the camera, editing was your kind of gateway in?
It's interesting because when I was in Russia and I tried to study cinema in Russia, I was told that women should be editors and that I should go and study editing. And I said, well, I don't know what I want. I don't want to study editing. I'm curious. I need to discover, And when I got to the US, I became one of the first things I did. I became an editor. I mean, it's not one of the first things. Actually, I used to shoot music bands for 3 years. I did all kinds of, things. It wasn't just... But as a métier, kind of as a craft, I kind of was drawn to it because you could sit there for hours by yourself and you had the whole power in the world, what you're going to do with material. You're almost like a collage artist, talking about Joseph Cornell. I mean, you're basically constantly rearranging things and you're finding this balance among elements, that you're working with. And, there's so many rhythms in it. There's a rhythm between two shots. There's a rhythm within the sequence, a rhythm among sequences and the whole movie. So it's this incredible, but it's also a bit of a craft of one person. You're sitting there by yourself and you're working with the material. Of course, you have a director, but still there's so many hours that you're left alone to just sort of propose and to figure it out. So I think, and that was this kind of... almost like a solitary confinement drew me to that.
Well, yeah, because what I understand is that you wanted to do editing until you found a story of your own that you wanted to tell. How long were you editing before a story resonated with you so much that you said, I need to actually make this?
Right. I mean, I think, it took a while. I think, I was making short films and I also worked with a theater group. I did scenography for theater, sort of we had interdisciplinary artist collective, a choreographer, a set designer, and a filmmaker, and we did this kind of expanded cinema. So I did works, but they were not necessarily on film, So at some point I started realizing that I can kind of bring my interests together, this interest in dance and performing arts, actually in broad way, and cinema. I can start merging them together. And I got a little sort of jaded with conventional documentaries. I felt like they're all sort of in a format that people accept. And I really wanted to make something that is different, So that's how it started. I basically started thinking, okay, well, I worked on a documentary about contemporary dance from Africa, and I met a lot of amazing people. So I was a co-director and editor for that film called Movement Revolution Africa. And through that experience, I met Nora Chipalmire, who was one of the artists who were interviewed. And then it just, these things happen. You start realizing that you can make something new. And that's how it went. And then you just go with it. You say yes to things, and things start, get organized somehow.
Well, I guess they would say like the power of yes. Once you start saying yes to things start lining up for you.
That's what Merce did. He always said yes to things.
Well, as you started exploring dance and getting interested in this, how quickly did Merce's name come across to you?
Right. So the first time I've seen Merce's work was on film, actually, because he was a kind of choreographer who embraced every technological advancement of his time, from 16 mil to all the way to motion capture. And he used computers and all kinds of things. So he was out there. And of course, if you were into dance film collaborations, you could have not passed him, And what I've seen was this piece from 1965, Variations 5, which was kind of a strange thing. There were multi-screens in a TV studio with all kinds of, magnetic poles and sound feedbacks. And it's was not a normal dance performance. It was this kind of happening, an event. And I was like, who did that in 1965? Like that. And so then I was very much interested in experimental film also. And Stan Van der Beek was the filmmaker, and he's a kind of one of the forefathers of American avant-garde from the 60s. So he worked with Merce. So I kind of got into his mind and what he was about through his film work first. And then, of course, I brought Charlie Atlas, who made a film, a very epic film about Merce Cunningham, from 2001. I brought him to Russia and we showed that film, and we remember discussing this, and I was like, well, I don't know how do you work with Merce, because he's kind of like a choreographer where 16 dancers go into different directions and you cannot make a single shot. I just don't know how you guys, like, I don't even understand. And so I never imagined actually making a film about Merce Cunningham until 3D came along. And what happened with 3D, 2011, Wim Wenders made a film Pina about German choreographer Pina Bausch. Everybody now compares, our film to his film. Now he finally watched our film, which was quite a moving experience, for me, because I was watching his movies when I was in Russia, the retrospectives already. So it was kind of came full circle, which was kind of moving and brilliant. He loved our movie, but it's interesting that, I watched some excerpts, especially from that film, over and over again, especially The Rite of Spring, this one piece. And I really could feel like, well, dance and 3D have something in common. There may be some potential here that hasn't been explored. Now, 3D has been around forever. I mean, it's not like yesterday it showed up. But it was a feeling that you could, if you use it in a certain way, you could really create an experience of a dance. And it's a different kind. Everybody says, oh, it's like on stage. It's not like on stage. That's really is not relevant. It's not either or, It's just different. And I was like, why isn't it, so many musicals are not in 3D? Why is it like, so it's just, I started questioning that. That coincided with the closure of Merce Cunningham Dance Company in 2011. It shut down December 31st. And I was sitting there at the last performances of the company. And that's when it hit me that maybe 3D and Merce can be a good fit.
When you're watching the other film about Pina,
Mm-hmm.
Was it hard not to let that influence you, or was it the way that he approached that film was different enough that like it didn't even dawn in your head like, oh yeah, I can easily not worry about that kind of influencing how I'd want to tell my story?
Well, his film, Wim's film, it basically showed what's possible, like what's the approach. Because, I was trying to understand because I'm like, linguist, right? So I'm trying to understand what's the language here, what's the language of 3D cinema. Now, I don't know if even the Avatar people can answer that question. I'm just very curious. Like, yes. Where's the book on 3D editing? Do you have one? I have not seen that.
James Cameron, please.
Yeah, come on. Somebody got to yes. do it. The other thing is that, I started watching a lot of 3D films, of course. Kiss Me Kate, stuff was like thrown into the camera, things. I watched James Cameron, like live action ones. It's very important. Not like the ones that, all CGI and, converted or whatever. Like really people shooting native 3D, And I watched James Cameron's, Cirque du Soleil, And I watched how they shot it. And I was like, oh, that's just not the way to do it, But because they had 3 rigs and they shot it from different sort of perspectives, that's how they would shoot 2D stuff, But when you start cutting, nothing cuts. So you have to invent some kind of character who walks around so you can cut to them,
Mm-hmm.
So with them, it was completely different. He choreographed the shots, The shots were choreographed. So you almost like choreographed human eye, So it's the first time I saw that like that. I've seen that in 2D cinema because I think Bob Fosse and especially Robbins, they were very good at that too. But this was different. This was all about, I think the best 3D film will be the one that will have no cuts. Honestly, because it's, like the first shot in Gravity is very good because it's 12 minutes long. You kind of in space and you keep discovering things. And that's one of the reasons I thought 3D and Merce is good because they both work in space, So I think it influenced us, but that approach was something we took from Wim Wenders, this idea of like this kind of choreographing human eye. Wim, Pina Bausch and Merce Cunningham are completely the opposite. Pina was interested in what moves the dancer to move. And Merce was interested in concepts, physical questions. He didn't start with emotion. He didn't start with music. He didn't start with narrative. He started with action. So they came from completely different... And in a way that Pina is really like... She's made for cinema, and Merce isn't.
Well, when you decide you want to tell a portion of Merce's story,
yeah,
Was it just because that era of 1944 to 1972 was the most prolific that you said, at 72, that's a good stopping point? What made you instead of continuing a little bit further on?
Right. No, I don't think the most prolific. I mean, he was incredibly prolific. I mean, he made 180 dances and only 80 fall in that period. So he went and made 100 more, after that. I think what when I began the project, I was really interested in the work. I came from a kind of, I knew the artist, but I didn't know the person. I didn't know who he was as a human being. I only, I've seen the movies, but I still couldn't know. When I began researching, I started realizing how incredible the journey was of Merce becoming Merce, from a young dancer to established choreographer. Because, a lot of people have all kinds of misconceptions where he came from, but it's such an American story because, he had nothing. He had no support, no money, no audience. People threw tomatoes at him and things like that. Mm-hmm. There was no press, there was no support. So, and yet he kept going. Now, if you're a writer, you keep going. That's one thing. If you're a musician, you keep going. That's one thing. But you're a dancer, so you're aging. Don't forget that. And we all know how that feels, right? So basically, he was going despite the fact that the company didn't perform, or he didn't perform, and he was aging. I mean, his height of his career, 64 at that period, when he gets to Europe and he gets all these accolades, he's 45 years old. What does it mean for a dancer to be 45 years old and to finally dance as much as you wanted to? So, this spirit of perseverance, that really was important. There's also, this period is about his company being kind of like a family. It's like 9 people, 6 dancers, a designer, and a composer, and maybe like a manager, going around the country, being together. It's a very important period in American history and art, where New York is the center. The center moves because of World War II from Paris to New York. Things were possible in New York. You could get a $20 loft. You could be together. You could share things. You could just make things just because you wanted to make them. So there was this kind of spirit that I was very much fascinated with, rather. And then in the 70s it changed because they became kind of an institution. So and plus the success came, all these things. So it was different, So I think that period really, the film really, the focus of it is how Merce became Merce.
It was, having never known Merce at all, watching this film, it was interesting to see his approach, because I felt like it made it seem like anybody could be a dancer, because any movement, big or small, is considered dance.
Yeah, it's possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's possible for dancing. It's
yes.
not considered dance, but it is possible.
Yes. And it's, as some of the dancers were saying in the film, where it's, if he wanted you to know yourself first as a human being, mm-hmm. and then what that meant as a dancer. Was he, in your studies, as you were researching him, difficult to work with? Because it seems like such a generous viewpoint, but it also felt like people struggled working with that.
Right, because it's very interesting. First of all, you just have to understand, he invented his own technique. He invented a new kind of dancer. Now, every time you invent something, you're going to experience resistance. Yeah, that's just a natural thing. But what's interesting, and he wasn't happy with how dancers dance, so he started teaching them. I don't know if he was in love with teaching, not necessarily, but he had no choice because he had to educate those dancers so they can dance what he wanted. And he was very generous. He invited people in and he gave them class and they learned what he wanted. So there was this kind of dynamic. But usually, like normal choreographers, in terms of the contemporaries of his, there was a lot of sort of discussion and, there was a lot of sharing what this dance is about and all kinds of things. And Merce wouldn't tell dancers what it is about, why. Why is this or why is that? He would just ask him, let's just do the movement. And what he would do is he would start, as I mentioned, each dance with a physical question or concept. Like, okay, this dance is based on the idea of falling. Right, so he'll make a gamut of movements. So let's say 80 different versions of falling, and then he would throw dice and see, okay, this comes first, and this is second, and this one you're gonna do, and that one you're gonna do. And like, I mean, it's complete chaos. I mean, imagine that. But he managed, like, you look at his, it's like high math, his notes. It's like, okay, who does what? What's interesting now, you know, the notes were not accessible for a long time, but now you can see, he says, this is what chance procedures say, and this is what I think, which is so interesting. And it's a question of which one did he chose, you know? But all the secrets of the, you know. But then he would say, okay, we'll just do the movement. And then sometimes things are impossible. The combinations come up, you don't know. But he wouldn't give up. He would just say, we accept that, we're going to work it out. That's why he came up with some really weird, interesting stuff. Because he used chance procedures as a method. It's not like anything goes. It's not an improvisation. You know, it's not like, you know, anything is possible. It was a method to arrive to a dance, you know. And I think it's a rigorous process, quite difficult, and all he wanted the dancers to do, to be present and concentrate on doing the action, you know. And sometimes it's incredibly frustrating because there's no kind of personal engagement. We don't discuss why and what, you know, it's happening. You know, we're just doing things. You know, the only way to do it is to do it. Like, let's just keep working. So I think there was a lot of you know, tension at times. But also because everybody was an individual, every dancer was an individual, and he treated everyone as an individual. There were all kinds of relationships he had with different dancers, I think. So it's not cut and dry. Like, I mean, was he an amazing communicator? Or was he... Why wouldn't he tell them things? You know, like, was it part of the process? You know? So I mean, he was incredibly generous. Everybody who remembers him later on, he was... You know, he's a nice person to be around, you know, and plus they shared things. I mean, they would have, you know, picnics and dinners and all that. There was like really kind of like a family, you know. So, but at the same time, they had a distance, you know. I think there was a little bit of a distance all the time between him. The person and the dancers, the person who talked the most was John Cage. You know, he was there kind of solving things and being the communicator. And I think John Cage probably spent more time writing fundraising letters than making music at those times.
Well, for me, how I related to this was improv. My background is in improv, but I found a lot of relations to this because improv is very just a there's no longevity. It's in the moment, and then it's just gone forever. No matter how much you try to tell somebody about it later, it's never as good as if you weren't in that moment experiencing it with others.
Yeah.
But then also that sense of lineage as well, because as you mentioned, when Merce passed away and the company closed, that ended. There's no direct lineage to that.
Yep.
And there was an improv teacher, Del Close, in Chicago, who had that lineage. And there's a different, where I studied was definitely a demarcation point of, people that had studied when Del was alive, and then people who came just afterwards. And there was always like a reverence to those people, like, oh wow, you actually studied with Del? What was that like?
Yeah.
And so with with the company closing, are these people passing on what Merce taught to other people in different areas?
Right. So the people, that's one of the motivation was also to make the film, is that when I was watching those dancers, I felt like, oh my God, they're at the height of their career and the company shuts down, and they have so much of Merce in them. You know, they are the last generation of dancers trained by Merce himself. In the last 10 years, he hasn't been traveling that much, so they really got a lot of him, you know. So, and it's always a question with live arts, right? How the rite of passage is actually happening. And of course, the best one is from person to person. You know, that's the most efficient, and that's the strongest, really. So, but with ballet, for instance, if you think of it, with the classical forms, you know, there's a sort of a school, you know, institutions that take care of it. But with contemporary music or contemporary dance, I think it's much more of a question, you know. So right now, for instance, the works are licensed to different companies. It's a 100th anniversary this year of Merce Cunningham, so a lot of things happening. A lot of different companies perform his work. But every time the work is staged, there's going to be like a Cunningham person, you know, going there. They're still around. They're still there. You know, what's going to happen in 50 years when there's not going to be Cunningham people to come with? would the work survive? What would happen? I think that's a really good question. I mean, they're trying to build, Merce Cunningham Trust trying to build a sort of a system and sort of preserve the legacy, educating and bring up stagers, people who can actually stage the work. But it's an unknown. I really don't know. And I think that there's nothing can compare to this direct contact with the person you are working with. Yeah.
For you, as you're making the film, because the first shot in the film, which I really like, is it a train tunnel or because it is beautiful the way you push in and then stop and then do like a rack focus where it's a phenomenal shot.
Thing. Yeah.
As you're taking all these dances and putting them out in the world, because I feel like that was one of Merce's things is that it doesn't have to be confined to the stage.
Absolutely,
it can be elsewhere. How did you choose locations? Where did you already start, as you're watching these pieces, kind of formulating locations you wanted to take these out into the world?
Yeah, because the idea was to not capture dances, but translate Merce's ideas into cinema with capital C. That was the initial idea. So as soon as you start thinking about dance in cinema terms, stage goes away, because cinema doesn't think in stages. It thinks in places and spaces, but not stages. So unless it has a narrative component, like Merce Cunningham and John Cage gave the first concert together, we have a stage, because it is about that, But so what we did with the director of choreography, Robert Rauschenberg, who worked with Merce for 32 years, and Jennifer Goggans, one of the dancers who worked with him for 12 years, we went through 80 works that Merce basically created within the time period, and we identified 14 iconic dances. Most of them are collaborations with Robert Rauschenberg, who was the designer of the company at the time. But there's also Andy Warhol and Jasper Johns, and then from those we actually picked excerpts. And then we identified those physical questions I told you about and concepts behind each dance. And then we would think about those in cinema terms. So, for instance, if it's a dance based on the action of falling, we'll put on the rooftop, because cinema is all about illusion. Nobody has to fall from the rooftop. Mm-hmm. But if it's on the rooftop and you use the cinema language, to highlight that, then you're going to experience that as a viewer. If it's a dance based on the action of being close together, literally, not just emotionally, but like literally tied together, then we figure out a confined space. Now, you can't quite create a confined space because dancers have to move, so we do it with light. So it's a kind of web of light that's crisis. If it's a dance based on an action or concept of layering, it's like, things are constantly shifting between foreground, middle ground, background, we'll put in the woods, because actually if you have those thin pine trees, you have million layers, so you basically amplify the idea. So almost like 14 different movies in one movie. It's like an event staged in cinema, so that was the approach. So that's how the locations came about. The tragedy of it all is that we really wanted to film it in New York, so we walked New York, found all locations in New York. Then financially it was impossible, and we had to move to Germany. And we had to start over. So we had to shoot in Hamburg and in Cologne and in Stuttgart. Geography, it's from from north to south all the way. And we had to scout all the locations again and re-storyboard again. The whole movie was only shot in 18 days. It took 7 years to make it.
For you, as you're blocking out these dances, are you treating the dances and their movements as this is a fixed thing, and I, recording these, filming these, will have to adjust how I want to move the camera accordingly. We're not going to change the dances. I have to dance around those somehow. That's it. Yeah. So you choreograph. That's Inventors. You choreograph audience's eye, right? So you can change choreography. Merce is not there. If he would be there, he might have changed things. Mm-hmm. Actually, I think, but we can't. So everything is preserved. Merce. It's exactly how Merce staged it. But there were a lot of interesting shifts and adjustments. A lot because they're different spaces. Space defines how far you can go, or so things like very pragmatic things. So what we did, as soon as we kind of settled on a place, we would basically measure it out. We would model it in an architectural program, really, and then we would put in some previs program, and then we would actually make our dances, and then we would start choreographing the camera. And on top of it, we did multiple rehearsals. The first one was in 2013 with 6 weeks, 6 days a week, 6 hours a day with 15 dancers. So we actually
were there with my DP in all these days, and every day we would actually try to look for things with a little camera, just trying to understand. And then we got to do 3D tests with Great Gatsby choreographer, actually, and trying to understand what does 3D do to that. And then in 2015, we ended up doing Summer Space with pointless decor, the Rauschenberg pointless decor. That was like a full-fledged pilot with cranes and everything. But we tested the process. Can we storyboard this so precisely that we get on set and we actually can teach people very fast, and then they can actually execute it. That was a very interesting process. That really we changed a lot of things based on that shoot, like how we work, because crane crews cannot remember more than 40 seconds of choreography. Like that was one of the things. Apparently on Pina they worked and they listened to music, all the cues were in music, but fundamentally don't change choreography. You basically make choices of what people see at every single moment, but also you remember the idea of the dance. Because those choices, what people see, are guided by what the dance is ultimately about. And although Merce never like to say what it is about, if you know the concept behind it, you can kind of keep it in your mind while you're designing this choreography. And the magic thing is like you have to synchronize those two. And imagine this huge cranes, 50, like techno cranes, all this. There's a lot of things have to align for a single take to come together.
So with 18 days, an ambitious shooting schedule, for sure. I guess the one thing that you have is you have this company of dancers who know these routines extremely well.
Absolutely.
So that part, at least, you feel like, okay, I can not have to worry as much about that. I can focus more on everything else in terms of camera moves, blocking, things like that. Still charting out time to adjust dancers for the different areas you're going to be filming in. As you said, a stage or a different location completely changes some of the parameters.
Absolutely.
Over 7 years, how do you maintain the companies and yourselves, your own enthusiasm? Like, this is going to happen, guys. I swear, this time we're going to make it work.
Yeah. Well, first of all, you have to convince the world it's okay to make a $3 million movie in 3D about an avant-garde American choreographer in political climate that we live in. Because there's always other things people think more important to do. But, you have to be daring, and you have to be a bit crazy, and you have to have a vision. I think these things come together eventually, and you have to kind of have this spirit of perseverance. Every time when things really felt like they're never going to happen, I just thought about what this man went through for 30 years, aging every day, not dancing, getting up, and he kept going. So I think that was definitely something that kept me going too, but also it's just a weird journey, because it's not that there were a lot of times where I felt like we're gonna shoot, we're gonna have enough money, we're gonna go ahead and shoot, because the film is really shot like a fiction film. There's no like running around with the camera. It's just, this is the shooting period, this is the locations, this is the storyboards, we film what we planned, so it has to be condensed, and there were a couple of times that it felt like, okay, we're going to do it. And every time I tried to convince people, even if we don't do it, we have to do rehearsals. We have to do rehearsals with the dancers, because then it becomes real for them. Now, the company closed in 2012, basically. We shot the film, most of it, in 2018. Do you know that's 6 years? This is a lot of... So like, we were very worried, Jennifer and I, especially, that we wouldn't have dancers to dance. Because they moved on, they do all kinds of things, they have their own companies, they dance for other people, they don't have Cunningham in them. It's like, it's like the best athletes or the best, ballerinas. If you don't go to class every day, you are losing something. So once they learned it, they actually, in 2017, we learned that we're going to film, definitely. So they went back to class. So they had about 6 months of like this going back to class and getting themselves together, and they were superb. That was just incredibly inspiring to see them, and they're not young anymore either, but like this, there was this one moment I have to tell you, is it's an anecdote that there's one moment where this dancer, his name is Rashan Mitchell, he had a real knee injury, and basically I get a text that he cannot do this movement, and then I was like, okay, well, we have to rethink what we're going to do with it, how we're going to shoot, everything, the scene, we're just sort of in this kind of tizzy of panicking a bit. And then I get another text from a physical therapist. Well, I think with the combination of this and that, maybe he can do one take. One take. One take. I will take it. So that was the incredible moment. I think that's when everything comes together. I mean, cinema is also, when you make cinema, it's very much in the present. It used to be that film was very expensive and people were thinking about what they're shooting much more. There was this kind of process of preparation. And that's how I felt all the time. I feel like, I only have so many chances, because sometimes the dancer would tell me, I can only do it 5 times, and this was just one time, and you have to get it or you don't get it, So this, when these things come together like that, it's incredibly powerful. It brings people together. They believe in things. They trust you. Their sense of community. It's like, this is just what life is about. That spirit is really, really inspiring.
Well, there are those individuals that have such a profound influence on the people that they teach or mentor, that when there comes a time where that you want to celebrate, or the person needs help, or you want to tell their story, that those people, no matter where they've scattered to around the country, around the world, will take time out of their lives and come together to help this individual, whether it's to celebrate or commemorate, whatever the occasion may be.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's their legacy too. Don't forget that.
Very true.
It's his, but it's theirs. It's just a double responsibility, actually.
Now, as you, Merce passed away in 2009.
Yeah.
Even though he was somebody, as you had mentioned, that he was always wanting to try something new, new technology, how to incorporate that into helping me tell dance. If you can answer this, when he passed, did he feel like he had succeeded, or did he still feel like there's so much left to do, and again, time is undefeated? I'm not going to win this fight, but I just hope my legacy continues on.
It's a great question. I don't think he ever measured life in success. I think it's interesting the way that he worked with the artists and composers. They would go in separate corners and they would make things. Merce would make choreography, and the composer would make music, and the designer would make sets and costumes, and they come together and they meet at the premiere. That's your jazz ensemble. Here you go. So they were willing not to know, allow for things to happen. They were interested in what will happen at that particular moment. And when you have that approach, sometimes things work, as you know.
Yep.
And sometimes they don't. And they were willing to accept that, because right now these days everything is driven by this idea of success, that you have to succeed in order to advance, this kind of thing. I don't think they measured life like that. They liked each other, they shared a lot, and they were interested in what will happen when they meet in those circumstances that they create themselves. So I think he never was sort of satisfied, not satisfied. I'm sure it's interesting because as a performer, because that's another thing, when you're a dancer, in the film he says, I'm a dancer, first, so that's very interesting, what is his journey as a dancer versus his journey as a choreographer also. I think as a choreographer, I don't think he ever, he never stopped, and he wouldn't have stopped, and it's just whatever life span he was given, he would take it. I don't think it was time to go. He was interested in that too. How do you go? How do you disappear? But as a performer, I think it was much harder because, the aging process kind of takes over, and we all can relate to that. That's why I say, anybody can watch this movie. You don't have to have a background in Merce or dance. We have bodies. They change, and they're different every day. So I think that's a lot about that, So I think as a performer, I'm sure he had ups and downs, and he had to accept things. Like he lost his jump. He has to accept that, what is he going to make work next? What's he going to do next? So I think that's an interesting one. But I don't think necessarily, I think he was very happy that he got to do what he wanted, because at some point when visual artists got quite successful and they started selling. That's another thing, is that, visual arts can sell. Performing arts have a much harder time to sell unless they become this popular culture. And even then, it's sort of up and down, up and down. So I think he was happy that he got to do what he wanted, and he had an opportunity to do so. But I don't think that necessarily, the success was satisfactory. Yeah.
It is, as you mentioned, and you alluded to, like with athletes, it is when the spirit is willing and the body is not.
Yeah.
The hardest thing that is when you have to accept that you have to let that move on. And
Absolutely.
what do you do next? And it seemed like Merce, at least he kept on. He embraced the idea of discovering what lies behind that door. And I know that some people struggle with that concept. Like, oh wait, this is what I always wanted to do, and I can't do it anymore. Now what?
Yeah, and he just kept going. I mean, he kept finding, he kept reinventing, he kept going. Yeah.
So the film opens December 13th.
Yes.
I know that you spent 7 years bringing this dream to life. Are you working at anything now, or you feel like, oh, I just need to take a breather and then focus on my next project?
It's funny, when we shot the movie, it was the cut, with the wrap party. I said, okay, now I'm going to do this other thing. And they looked at me like, are you absolutely crazy? I was like, you just shot this movie. You're going to do what? But I always feel that life is too short and there's too many ideas, and I think I'm sort of on a mission to bring physicality and performing arts back into cinema. I think we're missing, really. I mean, there's just so much in human action that is incredibly fascinating that I think cinema, with all the effects, with all due respect to effects, is being sort of eradicating. So I'd like to make a fiction film, actually, so that would be based on performance, but it's not a documentary. It may be based on the real life, actually, it probably will be, but so I'd like to move towards that experience. Whether it's going to be in 3D, I mean, people say, well, you're going to make another film about a choreographer in 3D, a documentary. I don't know. I like to make things that I haven't made before. I've never made a 3D movie before. It took a long time. Maybe this one's going to be a fewer years.
Well, if people want to stay up to date with you or Cunningham the film, what's the best place to keep up to date with you, and what's the best place to look for the film?
Right, so CunninghamMovie.com, please. That's a U.S. Website that you can find now. The film actually opens in 25 countries theatrically, so please look it up. I mean, there's CunninghamFilm.com, which is a UK site. But it's pretty much all over the world, so people will get to see it on big screen, which is also incredibly thrilling. For me, it's kinodance.com, kinoanddance.com. So you can find me. I'm on social media, although I'm not very active, but I think, if you want to find me, you will.
That's right. I'm sure Zoe's saying, you be more active. Be more active. Please.
I'm trying. Yes, I have to. Yes, I know. I'm trying. But it takes so much time, You can't do anything else. That's the problem.
That's true.
Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, my guest today has been Alla Kovgan. The film is Cunningham. Please check it out. It is incredible, especially in 3D. They're going to bring these dances to life in a way that you may not have ever had a chance to see before. So well worth your time. I'm Frank Moran. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at HappyGoJackie. We'll see you back here next time for another episode of iTalk Movies, right here on Popcorn Talk.
From producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, and the entire Popcorn Talk Network, we would like to thank you for tuning in. For questions or comments, be sure to visit popcorntalk.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of the Popcorn Talk Network.